Hi, I'm Marco Rinaldi.
I'm Tariq.
We're both writers and hosts of Page One, the Writers Podcast, which speaks to writers about their writing process. And we're delighted to have been asked to host this talk for Chimera 2023 with the brilliant Brent Weeks. Brent, of course, needs no introduction. He's the best-selling author of the Night Angel and Lightbringer series and has won numerous awards over the years. His most recent book sees him revisiting the world of the Night Angel after many years and is out now. Thanks for joining us, Brent.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me. It's a delight. I being introduced as brilliant is always a lovely way to start my day.
So I mean, the way we always start these things is sort of to go back to the start, if you like, and wonder, did you always want to be a writer? Was that always your goal?
I started young. I started my first novel when I was about 13 years old. So okay. I'd read a writer, Edgar Allan Poe, who made me feel like he had experienced things in the world that I thought I was alone in. And that was really powerful to me as a lonely, introverted kid, to have somebody connect with you who's not even at that point he'd been dead for 150 years. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is fiction is really powerful. Like the way we can connect, the way we can make each other's lives better through, these made up stories. So I was like, that's amazing. I want to do that. And I started right away. And of course, it was horrible, but that's where I started.
And I think I'm right in saying that you then went on to become a literature major and then an English teacher after that. Were you throughout that period writing in the background and trying to get that breakthrough with the novel?
I was. I actually I mean, as I grew up, I realized I looked into writing as a career because I know lots of people want to be a novelist, and I realized that just doesn't happen, right? like nobody makes that work for them. So I experimented with trying to be like, okay, what else can I do? Like, okay, I know I like to work with words. I guess I do like teaching. So I was actually I took a semester in England at Oxford, and during Hillary term back in 1997, I believe. And I took a writing class, and I knew my stuff was garbage, but the other kids seemed to think that it was pretty good. So I had this crazy idea of like, you know what? It's fine to be young and poor, right? So I'll just see if I can make this thing happen, and I'll get it out of my system. If I realize I'm just crap, and I'll do this for a couple of years and then I'll get a real job. I'll be an insurance agent or something, which sounded soul crushing to me at the time. But when you're 17, you make these declarations to yourself that are very grandiose. So I graduated from college and realized I have no job. I have no money. I need to find something. So I tended bar for a little while, and I would, tend bar at night and then write during the day and I was trying to make that happen. I'd started a novel when I was 19. I worked on that for about 6 years before realizing that it was terrible again. and that I needed to trunk it. So there was a girl that I'd been interested in since about 7th grade she was in Oregon. So I was like, I can be poor anywhere. I'll go move out move out, be close to her. Got a job as a teacher, and I don't know if either of you have taught, but teaching takes everything you have, especially when you're new. So it took all my creativity. So I like teaching. I really like the kids, like connecting with kids. But when I had those few minutes when I would have some time to write, I realized that my creative wells were completely dry. Mm-hmm. Which was terrifying for me as an artist personality. It's like I sit down, I'm like, okay, here we go, let's do this. I got some time, and then I have nothing to say, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I'm a terrible person, right? Like I can't multitask. I can't write and teach. And so thanks to my wife, it worked out with the girl. So she said, you know what? Why don't I work the day job and you write? And so I kind of became the the typical house husband. I would make breakfast for her. I'd pack her little brown bag lunch, and then I'd make dinner, when she's coming home, and I would write during the day. So we were poor, and that was, romantic for about a month. and then just sucked, and then we did that for 5 years. So for 5 years we were poor, and I was, unemployed and thinking about, I was writing all the time.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about, okay, I'm gonna at some point have to get a job, right? And I'm gonna have to present my CV to some employer, and they're gonna be like, so what do you do for this gap here? So you didn't have a job for 5 years, and so I felt like I was digging myself into a serious hole. So, but at one point, I'd finished the first novel. I knew the best thing to do would be to write the first book in a new series, and I just didn't want to. So I was like, okay, the thing I want to do is stupid. What I want to do is I want to write book 2 in the same series. And I talked to my wife about it, because she was the one working the day job that was kind of soul killing. And I said, I want to do this stupid thing. And she's like, you got to do what you're passionate about. So I wrote the second book. And then at that point I was like, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. I've already, wagered my whole life on this stupid thing. Let's just go for it. And so I started writing the third book, and I met an editor who was interested, and he said, you know what? I want to do this cool thing. They've done it in the romance genre. They sort of did it with Naomi Novik, and they grabbed somebody who's got some books published, and they published them all quickly. He said, I think that could work in fantasy. And so he's like, he read the first book. He really liked the first book. He's like, I think we can do this with you. He's like, he was reading the second book. He liked it. He said, I got to talk to my people and put together a publishing package and put together a deal. And then he got fired.
Oh, no.
So he got let go. He got downsized. Publishing was struggling, as it so often goes through these troughs. And so he got let go. And nobody else was interested for another year. He landed on his feet someplace else. And then, this is the infuriating thing. So he came back, he was interested in it, and then suddenly everybody's interested. And we've been sending it all these places. Nobody's interested. One person shows interest, everybody's interested.
Yeah.
And you're like, it's the same book it was yesterday. How dare you be interested now? So I got an offer. I got a preemptive offer from Tim Holman at Orbit. And, at that point, it had been 5 years. Or almost 6 at that point. We were poor. It's like, I would have given the book away.
Yeah.
Like I would have just for the stamp of approval. I actually got this published by a New York publishing house, this is a real thing. I'm a real writer now. I would have given it away. And so he offered a preemptive bid, and my agent said no. And this is why I tell people, this is why you have an agent, because they know things. When you're willing to give things away for nothing, because that's just where you're at emotionally, they come back.
Had he asked you first, or did he just jump in and say no?
He just said no. He didn't even tell me, which is good, because I would have had a heart attack. And then Tim called back a half an hour later with a better offer, and we took that one. So which to me was 2 more years of writing, even if the amount wasn't an enormous amount. It was for 3 books. I'd done 6 years of work on this. The totals were not huge when you took the amount of work that's gone into it, but it was like, okay, that lets me write for another 2 years. So that makes me do it. So that was my launch. So and Tim took that idea, the other guy that had, and he ran with it, and they published the books quickly, and readers really liked that, because in epic fantasy we're very used to waiting.
That's
you
right.
Look at
really nice.
Exactly, George R. R. Martin approach, which is you might never get the next book type thing. So this is a very different, but it's fair to say, I think, that it obviously worked really well for you, because those 3 books came out. Your career really was launched from that. You had your Lightbringer series of books, the Black Prism.
That was the Night Angel books. So the 3 Night Angel books came out within a month of each other. So it was one of these things. It seemed like the stupidest thing I could possibly do. If nobody bought the first book, then who was going to buy the second book? It seemed like I was just wasting my time. And instead it came out and it looked like it was this brilliant marketing plan or something. And it hadn't been that. I mean, it was just like, this is what I want to tell. This is what I want to do. This is what I love. So I wrote what I loved, and then it worked out for me. I wouldn't recommend it, but like, like you have this survivorship bias. People are like, oh, that worked for him. Let's do it that way. And it's like, man, this was a crazy thing. Do it if it's what you need to do. Like, it's what I needed to do.
When did you find your agent in that process? Was it after book one or
no? It was. I was trying for once to truncate the narrative a tiny little bit. So I wrote the first book. I tried to send it to a connection at Hollywood. I wrote a screenplay of it. I rewrote the first book with what I learned just by writing a screenplay. I was like, oh, okay, you have to bring this kind of focus to it. So I rewrote the first book, and then I went to a publishing a writers conference, and I met this guy there. So there were two agents who were there that on paper looked great for me. One was clearly not a fit for me, and the other one was like, this guy is my number one choice. And he had these really challenging questions that I was like, this guy understands story in a way that very few people do. He will make me a better writer. So I wanted to work with him. And so here, you're both writers. So here's one of the questions he asked. He said, think of one thing that your main character would never, ever do. Now, what happens to your manuscript if he or she does that thing?
Yeah.
And so he asked me that question. I thought I had a finished manuscript when I come to this thing. I'm like, I'm here. I'm ready to sell this to somebody. And I'm like, oh my God, that just makes everything so much better. Like, I need to go back and rewrite again. Like, I thought I'd had a done book. I'd rewritten. I'd already written numerous times. I wrote a screenplay. I went back. I rewrote again. And like, God, the manuscript that won't die. It just keeps coming back through the door. It's a zombie. So he asked that, and I was like, ah, crap. So I rewrote it, and then 9 months later, I sent it back. I sent it to him. And I sent it to him and to 32 agents that I would be excited to have represent me, because that was kind of the advice I got, is that a writer is in trouble when they get divorced, and a writer is really in trouble when they switch agents. is how I heard it. But like, which of course is a silly way to put it, but the impact of that relationship with your agent it's enormously important. So it took another 9 months of mostly me waiting for Dawn to get back to me, and every other agent either didn't respond, gave me a form rejection, or a couple of them wanted to see the whole thing and then dropped out. And it was like, it was Dawn, who was my number one choice, or it was nobody. And so I was like, okay, at that point I'd been writing for 2 years full time. And it was like, okay, if Dawn says no, then I need to seriously reevaluate. Like, maybe this is just not going to happen for me. And that took, like I said, 9 months, and I was in writing book 2 at that point. And then he's like, yeah, I think this book is great. I think, the only question I had was whether we send it out immediately or whether we should do any rewrites at all. And I was like, what? Like, that my number one guy was really enthusiastic about it kind of blew my mind. Really? So that was wonderful. And then he sent it out to numerous people before he sent it to the guy who eventually, tried to pick it up and then got let go. So I was trying to, brevity is not one of my gifts.
It's always interesting, these things, because it does, we've spoken to a lot of authors, and it is always interesting to hear, it does almost always sound quite serendipitous how things and the timing's right, and you met the right person at the right time and stuff. But I think what you're also seeing there in that answer is that, it might look like that, but you've also put in all the work to get to that point. I think there is sometimes this view that authors can come out of nowhere and get picked up by their dream agent and things like that, but you put in the legwork,
years in the background that no one knows about, to make that moment happen. Totally.
And there's one thing that I did that I sort of encourage people to do, which is, like, every time I got a rejection, I printed it out and I taped it to my wall.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, a rejection sounds like something you'd be ashamed of, right? And it's like, I was saying, like, this is proof that I'm in the game. I got to know this time, but like, I was brave enough to play. I took my swing and I missed here, or they missed. And I have had people that I submitted to look me square in the eye and say, no, you never submitted to me. And I'm like, yeah, I know I did, because my agent sent it to you and I waited 2 months to hear a no. And that was a really big deal to me when I got the no. I remember for you, it was like you had 50 things on your desk and you, no, clear your desk on off on Friday. So it's like, I was in the game, and it's like I was sending things out. I was doing the things you're supposed to do, and just like I covered one small wall with those rejections as we went along. And like I said, the worst is also you just don't hear back at all from some people.
Yeah,
and that's kind of sucks. I mean, there's 15 agencies that I submitted to, but I still haven't heard back from. I'm just still checking the mail every day.
There's still a chance, man. Yeah. So what's your process then when you sit down to write your book? Do you do a lot? I'm assuming you do a lot of planning in advance. You know where you're going with it. What's your 9 to 5 job style?
Like with every book, I try to be more organized and I try to have a better system, but it's chaotic every time in its own way. I've realized now that the first part of writing a book is always a little bit of contained chaos, and it's actually the hardest part for me emotionally, because I spend a lot of time just thinking. And I write notes and I write a part of a scene, and then I never end up using 95% of that stuff. And it's like, oh, I finally got it. And then I look at it the next day. Oh, that sucks. That's terrible. So I'll write little snippets of dialogue. I'll think about, I'll revisit. Like, I feel like you forget how to write books, or you go through this emotional time of like, you're like, I don't know how to write it anymore. I forgot it all. I know nothing. This is terrible. I'll never write another book again. And I sort of now, after having written, 10, 11 books, I guess 12 books, but not all of them published, like, I sort of realized, okay, this will pass. Like, this is an emotional reaction to how difficult it is to write a new book, to start a new book. Because I always think, if I make good choices now at the beginning, I can avoid all those dead ends and blind alleys that take so much time later. So really, I've got to make great choices now. And like, I'll do more outlining right now. It'll take me an extra week, but it'll save me 2 months down the road. And it never totally works out. It's so my process though is I sit down and I write every day. I used to do 6 days a week. I'm now doing 5 days a week so that I could be a reasonable father and human being, because I was working way too much for about 10 years, or 12. But now I 5 days a week, I get the kids off to school. Sometimes I drive them to school myself. Sometimes my wife does it. And then I come and I sit down and I write for 4 to 6 hours, just depending. And then I try to take care of sort of business stuff in the afternoon as much as I can, or, all the real life stuff that you just got to deal with in the afternoons more. So that's my process, is just like, okay, you just have to put in the hours. You just got to do the work. That like part of a writer's work is always just life. There's just the life stuff that happens. Yeah. Like, your friend goes through something awful and you're like, and they surprise you with some resilience they show or something, and you're like, oh, that's really neat, and that becomes a character moment for you. Or you read a book that's a strange book, and you like pick out a detail and you're like, is that how scholars in the 1300s did things? I didn't know they had desks like that. Oh, they didn't have desks. They had little foot pads, like the scribes who were writing down the manuscripts. Like, they just had a little thing to prop up their feet, and they would write on their laps. And I'm like, oh, those poor guys' backs, that must have sucked. And so all those little things go into the hopper, whether you're working or not, whether those are out of work hours. And I do this thing where I don't count any of that as working, and I'm trying to let that all the non-writing stuff that goes into writing, I kind of tend to say I'm not working when I do that. I don't work enough. It's like, well, actually,
and just
you're always grabbing onto things. And But my 9 to 5 is pretty, like, I just try to be fairly disciplined about it because I need to have structure just with how my brain works. And it's like, okay, I gotta turn off my access to the internet, because when I get stuck on something, I'll just go to Twitter or something, or I'll click on something because this is hard and that is easy. That is a distraction. So like, I literally sometimes just say, honey, I need you to actually lock down the internet for me, because I am like put the child pass lock on it, because I am working on something that's so hard right now and I don't want to do it.
It must have been so easy to write books before the internet came along. It must have been.
Yeah, no internet on the
book a week
typewriter
or something.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I who was it? It was one of, I think it might have been Tolstoy. Like he had his servant lock him in his room, and he said, "Don't take the key. Don't let me come out until 7 p.m." And it's like writing is hard. It's even hard for the best people. It's like, it doesn't look hard when it's on the page, but it's sort of like, it's like any sport. When people are really great, you don't see the effort. Like it looks like it's easy.
100%.
And so it's like, and nobody sees how much sweat you put into it. And that's sort of beautiful. Like they only see the final product. So it doesn't matter if your first draft is horrible. It doesn't matter if you write the worst first draft out of every published or unpublished writer out there, because they only see the final draft. Oh, I've got to do another draft. It's like, okay, who cares? It's just work. Like a lot of the stuff I think about this is like, it's just work. Like, okay, my characters, I want to differentiate the dialogue, and we are one person. So we only have so many voices we can naturally do in our heads, right? And so like, it's like, I need to go through and I need to look at this character, and I need to look at every single line of dialogue that he says throughout the whole book. And I need to make sure that it sounds like him and like nobody else. It's like, okay, well, that just takes time. All that is like, oh yeah, here he sounds like this other character, or here, this woman, she just sounds like one of the other women and she should sound different. Okay, well, that's just work. You just take 2-3 days, you go through every line of dialogue and you just fix it. And you go, okay, no, actually brevity, he's always brief. Let's cut out all the unnecessary words here. Less explanation. Maybe another character has to ask them a question to clarify. Like a lot of this, I think, just comes down to like putting in the time, and nobody knows that you didn't do that on the first draft because you're just so stinking smart. You don't have to buy into the myth of genius, which I think is really damaging for all of us in the West, and used to not be part of our heritage. Like that didn't happen until Coleridge talked about Shakespeare in that way. Before that, it was like storytellers are artisans, and we can be great artisans, and I think we can be artists, but it's like a lot of what we do is just work. It's just work.
Yeah.
So
and it goes back to that phrase as well. That writing is rewriting, kind of a thing. It's just polishing it and getting it to sound the best that you want it to be. And I was just going to ask about your planning process, particularly with, I always wonder this with sort of writers of epic fantasy, that how far ahead are you looking with your stories? Because obviously the Lightbringer series, I think it was originally a trilogy, then it became a quadrilogy, and then 5 books.
yes.
So it sort of grew in the telling, I guess. But how far ahead are you looking at the arcs of stories and things like that?
Well, I'd always wanted to Night Angel, like I even have a little interview at the back of one of those books where I said, there's more I want to tell in this world. I don't know if I'm ready to tell it yet. So I felt like my skills as a storyteller weren't yet up to par. So I was like, I'll just write this other thing quick, and I'll make up a whole new world, and then I'll come back with these better skills. So like, I didn't want to say it as a first time writer, because I thought it'd sound really arrogant to be like, well, this is going to be 9, 10, 12 books long, and I was just sure people would be like, oh, who do you think you are? Come on, man. You're 25, right? Like I was. So I'd always intended Night Angel to be longer, and so now I'm looking at things and I'm like, I have plot twists that I planned in the Night Angel world when I was 19 or 20. I'm not going to get to write those in for another 6 or 8 years.
Wow.
So I've had some things there, and then I've had a lot of other things where it's just like, okay, I have choices. I could start the story here, or I could skip, I could skip 6-7 years ahead and then get to the stuff that I have figured out. So I did this thing that was, again, really fortuitous. That first novel that I wrote when I was 19, that I spent 6 years on, like, I trunked it, but what I didn't trunk is all the world building work that I'd done. So I actually took that book and I took the most interesting character that showed up in it and I rewound 20 years. And I said, well, how does this guy become the guy who shows up very briefly in this book that needs to go in the trash? And so because of that, I had some of these characters that I already knew where they're going to end up. And I knew what was going to happen to some of these characters. But then as I told Kyler's story, because he was the character that was like, who is this badass guy who shows up out of nowhere? Like, I moved to a different part of the world. I told Kyler's story, and but I know what's going to happen in the world. So that was I was able to not waste that 6 years I spent on that first novel because I had, some world building elements. But so now what I've now I'm willing to talk about the whole thing, since I've got a little bit of seasoning and lost all my hair now. So I've the Kakari Codex, which is what we're calling the overarching series. It's told in 3 movements. So the first movement is the Night Angel trilogy, and that's kind of a complete story. And then the Kyler Chronicles are the second movement. And it's done in a different style. That's, as you start this book, you're like, okay, I know these characters, or I know many of these characters, but this is first person point of view. It's present tense. It's done differently. There's a different feel about this, even though some of the things are very similar. And then I've got a third act in mind that's gonna wrap in our third movement in mind, that's gonna take in some of the stuff that I planned all along. But I'm not going to talk about that too much yet, because that's still in the future. So awesome. I do think on these grand sweeping terms, and I do think of like characters of like, I want this character to become this person, or I want this character to face this hideous choice. And I'm not actually sure yet what they're going to do once they get there, but I know that they're going to be the kind of person where that choice is horribly hard for them. So there's things I build that are like pretty well fleshed out. There's a lot of story hooks, and there's some things of just like, this would be a cool problem for somebody to have to face. So
you're sort of leaving some hooks that you might pick up again later on or might not, but give yourself options, I guess.
Right. Yes.
And so Night Angel Nemesis is just out. There is there, and quite the sizable book there. And you're back to Kyler, as you said. This is the first book of the Kyler Chronicles, and you've said that you always had this plan to go back, but as you alluded to there, this is told in a different way. The original series was sort of a third person past tense. This is largely, not completely, but largely first person present tense. From a writing point of view, why did you want to tell the story in that way?
I always like to do things to challenge myself, I guess, is part of it. I've written some sections before in first person, and I find that's interesting. There's an immediacy, there's an emotional closeness that you have when you're fully in the character's shoes. And then there's also some challenges of just being like, okay, there's all this information. There's like all the other characters are doing things. And especially in this novel, it's like this becomes a heist story, right? Like there's a heist, and heists are all about misdirection. And it's like, okay, what if the other characters don't want to tell him what they're doing? And like, he can't know some of those details. That's going to be really frustrating to readers. Okay, that sounds like a tough challenge. Like, I want to see if I can handle that. I want to see what I can do with that. And then striking those balances of being like, okay, guys, Kyler doesn't know, so you don't get to know. And later you'll find out. And then hopefully when you read it a second time, you'll go, oh, that was there. And Kyler just missed it. Like all those hints were there all along. So there was a lot of technical difficulty with writing this way. I thought it would be interesting and fun. And I really wanted to have, it's a tragic story. I wanted to have the emotional immediacy of the first person point of view. And then with the technical difficulties of wrapping in a frame story, and for the readers to tease out like well, what happens? This is a story told to someone. There's some editing that has obviously gone on, but there's hints about what kind of editing has happened. And so I wanted to write a book that would really reward rereading. So you read it, you have this big, I hope, emotional experience, but then at some point you reread it and you go, oh, wait, that was there all along?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And wait, this person was doing this. Oh, Kyler just didn't see it. And I didn't either, because Kyler was missing it. So I thought it would be fun. I thought it'd be a fun challenge. I thought it'd be interesting. And I thought I would learn things that would make my writing better. And so I think it's done all of that for me. So it does ask readers like, trust me. It says, try something that's a little different. This isn't the same thing. Like, I'm not going to give you the same thing over and over. Like, I get bored. So I'm not going to do that. So trust me, I hope it's worth it. And I try to make it worth it. So that scares me to do. And I've certainly, read the reviews of like, I hate first person, 1 star, just, and that's just it. And some readers are going to be like that. And it's like, okay, well, I lose them. I hope other readers are great, gratified enough on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely.
That.
I mean, when you're writing a long running series of books, and it's kind of broken up into like an initial trilogy, then you've got the second movement. Are you writing it in a way that, if this is the first book that people are experiencing of you, that they can jump in with this, or or do you want them to start at the very beginning, or are you having to always feed things in so no one's left behind as they jump in here?
Yeah. So this, as a writer, was one of the most difficult challenges, and of course this is one of the things you try to make invisible. So I realized that I had 3 different readerships that I wanted to hit all of them, and that was the people who read Night Angel 15 years ago. They read the whole bit. They're busy with life. They don't want to reread right now, or they got too many things going on, so they're going to jump in. They sort of remember the characters, but they've read a lot of other stuff in between, so they need reminders. You have people who finished yesterday. So they don't want, they reread, or they read for the first time, and they're like, please don't give me 5 pages of action. And then we sit down and the characters talk to each other and say, well, Bob, remember that war we had yesterday? Yeah, I do. Yeah. You mean the one where Bill got beheaded and Jack took the throne? Man, that was rough. And then your wife left you. That's just such a killer for readers. So I also was going to have those readers, and then I was going to have the people who are completely new to this world. So hitting those 3 groups and then making it work. It's like, okay, here's Mama K. We run into Mama K. She's a really powerful character, both in terms of personality and in terms of political power. From the first series, it's like, what do we need to know the first time we meet this person? Like, she's had this very long and complicated relationship with Kyler. Okay, but what do we actually need to know right now? And what makes things difficult for Kyler right now? Okay. And then I can weave in some things as they talk, little reminders for people who, and like, but it's like you're doing a clause at a time, things to remind you of who she is, even how she looks, because Kyler's like, okay, he knows how she looks. He's not gonna, this is first person. So he's not gonna go like, oh, here's how she looks. It's just like you see your mom, you're like, hi, Mom. You don't think of like the length of her nose and how her ears are and the color of her earrings. You're just like, it's Mom. Obviously, I'm not going to describe her. So this was really challenging. It was really, I'll say it was the least fun of the writing challenges I took on, because I constantly had to put on a different hat and be like, if this is my first time meeting this character, how does this make sense? And then, okay, if I just need a reminder, and am I boring anybody? So I had some beta readers who hadn't read anything before and started with this. So you can start with this. Obviously, I hope if you do start with this, one, I hope you love it and that it works. I think it works from an exposition standpoint, but then you'll get more when you go back and you read the Night Angel trilogy. So I hope people will want to. I'm sure diehard fans will say, oh, you got to read the Night Angel trilogy first, so that you get everything. But it's like, you don't actually. I wrote it so that you could jump in.
And we're going to have to wrap up soon, but I did want to ask about fantasy generally, which seems to have had, it seems that it's got a more mainstream acceptance in the past few years. And I just wondered if you had a view as to why that was, and why, fantasy and sci-fi have sort of entered the mainstream a bit more.
I think it comes down to having some good movies. And I think it goes to the Lord of the Rings movies actually finally being made. I mean, it's been what, 20 years now? Has it been 20 years now? It's been a long time now. But like those being good, and filmmakers seeing that you can do that well on screen, that that everybody grew up with Harry Potter. It's like, apparently, adults read Harry Potter and enjoyed it. It's like, oh, fantasy is just for kids, has kind of lost that like that sneering condescension that Tolkien wrote an essay about, the sneering condescension that fairy stories, it's what they called it then, that adults gave to those kind of stories. 70 years ago, he was combating the fantasy is just for kids kind of thing. It's like, fantasy is clearly for any age. In terms of writing for the screen, it's like fantasy is really, really hard to adapt to the screen. So I think good adaptations are going to remain few and far between, because you get things that it's really hard to describe a secondary world very rapidly and very simply. And then you have studio executives look at it and they then just freak out because it seems too complicated. And so they go, let's dumb it down. Let's dumb it down so that the 11-year-old can get it. And then you just get mush, so the only way that doesn't happen is a book series comes out, it does really well as being its own thing, and then you have Game of Thrones or something, and it does really well because it's complicated and because it's big, and people go, oh, well, this is obviously for adults, and this is obviously its own thing. So I think with special effects being better and easier and cheaper to do, I think with people understanding that you can make series of shows with these, again, with a budget, within a budget, that lowers the bar for people attempting it. But I still think you're only going to see just the very highest selling series adapted, or the ones that are really cheap and easy to adapt, because it's hard to set up entire sets and costumes for everyone. That isn't something that's like, can we adapt the stuff that we made last year? So I think the movie thing is, and the TVs and the cheaper special effects are why we see more fantasy now. But thank goodness for that.
Absolutely.
It's fun to bring people in, because usually the books are better, but like a lot of people are like, I don't think those books are for me, until they see a movie and they go,
it's a bit of gateway. It makes them,
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, finally, we're at Chimera Festival right now, and so I think we have to ask the final question, which is, if you were plucked from this universe and you're placed in any fantasy universe you could pick, which one would you pick?
Oh,
and you can't pick your own. I think that has to be.
Right. No. Oh, I know. I wouldn't want to go to my own. No. That's too rough. There was Stephen Lawhead wrote these series. Let's see. Oh, I can grab these. Real quick. These were my two favorites out of the series. Sorry, these are like the old covers. Set in England. Pelias and Merlin. This one was my favorite. Yeah, I know, sort of cheesy fantasy covers from the 80s, but where there is some magic. But not a huge amount, and then he was basing it a lot on the Celtic peoples there, and that was wonderful. That was just a rich, really interesting time period, really interesting characters, and there's a warmth to it. So that would be, that would be my more interesting or more different one than what everybody else say. So,
I mean, there's not a lot, I suppose, you would want to go in, given that most people end up sort of get killed in battle or living
eaten by a monster.
Yeah, exactly. So
right.
But thanks very much, Brent. That's been a really great chat. So thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Marco, Tariq. Thank you.